right. Well, it's 11:04, so I think we can go ahead and get started. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our last webinar of the year. Crazy to think that 2023 is coming to a close. I'm Stephanie McCowett. I'm the marketing manager here at DATAMARK. You can see me in my teenage bedroom in sunny San Diego. It's bright green. That's why I had to let everyone know it's my my childhood bedroom. So to welcome to Public Safety GIS FAQ. I'm excited to introduce you all to presenters Adam, Todd, Hilary Norcross, and of course, Annie Cahill. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. I think everybody knows, if you've been on a webinar with us before, that we record all of these webinars and we put them up on our YouTube channel for viewing later. As long as you registered, you don't even have to be attending this webinar. As long as you registered, you will receive an email with the recording after the webinar is over. If you don't receive one, feel free to follow up with me or anybody on this webinar through our contact information, which will be provided at the end. To communicate with us, I think everybody can already see, you can use the chat or you can use the Q&A section of this webinar to answer any questions. And I think outside of that, we are kind of in the process right now of planning our webinars for 2024. So we do have a survey that's coming out. If you're attending this webinar, you'll probably receive it in the upcoming weeks. If you're interested in providing any input or insight on how you felt about the webinars over the last couple of years, or if you would like to see something in our schedule that you haven't seen before, please use the survey. I'll attach a link in the comments section of this webinar. And outside of that, I'll hand it over to Annie, Todd, and Hilary. Thanks, everyone.
Well, thank you. Well, welcome everyone. Happy December 19th. It's wild that we're at the end of the year. It's been an interesting year. So for those of you who know me, you know it's been a while since I've been on a webinar, okay? But we're gonna do as like we always do and make things a little fun starting out. So I see a lot of you know how to use the chat, but I want to go ahead and do like a little bit of an icebreaker. So what is your favorite holiday treat? Go ahead and drop that in the chat. What's your favorite holiday treat? Are you a cookie person? Are you a candy? Are you a prime rib maybe? Maybe that's your treat. Mom's fudge, love that. Bourbon. Peppermint candy. Oh, tamales. Oh, oh, caramel corn, nice. Fireball. Okay, cool. Cool. Okay. Well, welcome, Thomas. I know a lot of folks are here for the first time, so I'm super happy to see a lot of new names, and a lot of you have been with us for a long time. And now a more serious question. How has your year been? Like, just lay it out there. Good, bad, ugly. Meh. It's been good? Maybe? Hopefully it's been good. Chaotic? Yes, accurate. Busy? Ugly? Yeah. There's been a lot. Yeah. 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 Could have gone better, could have gone worse, but we all have something to be thankful for every day, right? Like, I'm thankful for you guys because you guys keep us going. So I'm really happy. Yeah, it's been a year, right? Well, good. Well, I'm so very happy that you guys are here, because you could have been doing anything else, but you're here to learn about our most frequently asked questions this year. And although I would like to say that they've saved the best for last, you'll notice that I do have two wonderful colleagues of mine, Hilary and Adam, that are going to be presenting with me. You actually won't really hear me much until the very end, as it should be. But Hilary and Adam are amazing colleagues of mine, and they have just done such an amazing job this year, and I'm so very proud of them and happy to have them on our team. And so I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to do this webinar with them. So I will go ahead and let them get started. And please, guys, please use the chat, okay? But you can also drop questions into the Q&A if you want. We will try to get to as many questions as we can during, and then we'll try to take some after. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. So today's agenda is we're really talking about what have we really seen patterns of as far as this past year has been concerned. So we have got a lot of questions surrounding legacy data management, managing, of course, for NG911. A lot of you, I know a lot of you personally, and a lot of you are well on your way in your journey. Some of you are just kind of starting to ask the questions, which is kind of what's really going on nationwide, right? Everyone is in various stages of readiness as far as that's concerned. A lot of you have had questions about version 2 of the data model. There have been some changes there, and so we've really fielded a lot of questions concerning that. And of course, you know, my wheelhouse is workflow development, things like addressing boundaries, and all things concerning workflow is really where I live on this team. And so for me, I'm a technical consultant. I've been with DATAMARK for about 5 years now, and I manage all of our strategic planning services, boundary facilitation. I do a lot of education for our company, and I've worked with a lot of you all on your individual strategic plans. So I will pass it over to you, Hilary, so you can, or Adam, I guess, to get started.
Yeah, thank you, Annie, and thank you guys for giving me the chance to talk a little bit today about legacy data management, some of the questions that we've seen over the course of this past year, and talks with you guys, with each other, and just trying to figure out exactly where we're going with all of this. So as far as legacy data management goes, there's quite a lot to talk about. It's certainly something that I have learned a lot about this past year, talking about like the past year and learning. That's probably been something that's really been on the forefront with some of the projects that I've worked on and working with you guys. So let's get into a little bit for our first slide here. I'm going to do a little bit of discussion on the 98% synchronization. So there's, of course, the legacy data management itself and some of the questions there, but I feel like this really kind of answers some questions up front of what exactly is the legacy data and the 98% synchronization. So, of course, I want to point everyone, we do have a couple of links that'll be really helpful throughout the day today in this PowerPoint. The first one that I have here for us is the NENA document talking about synchronizing the GIS system databases with MSAG and ALI. I do encourage everyone to check that out. That it has a lot of detail into what I might explain on a rough overview level. And that I feel like goes with anything NENA. They have a lot of really good resources there. So please check those out. We've included in this PowerPoint. Getting into it though, the 98% NENA compliance report. So what exactly is this? So of course, in 2009, they published this documentation, and really what they want to see is your legacy data, particularly your MSAG and ALI data sets and the data that's represented in your NENA layers, represented in sort of a matching compliance standard where up to around 98% of that is matching. You're going to see both your road center lines, for an example, matching with your MSAG. So for people that don't know, that master street address guide, that's going to have a lot of what we've been working on up to this point. So what we're transitioning out of. And so a big question that we saw a lot this year is, well, we're transitioning out of that. We're going to next gen 911. Why is it important for us to maintain something that we're maybe transitioning out of, that we're looking behind? It's really something that I would say and phrase it as we're bringing it with us. So with Next Gen 911, of course, there's a couple different reasons that I have listed here, but jumping to it, emergency services data, you always want to back up. You want to back up with everything, but in particular, this is something that's serious and important, and you want to have that core backup there. So I have here, backups are our backbone. we're always ensuring that we can provide the information and make that call happen. So of course, we're aiming for Next Gen 911. We're aiming for all of these great new standards, but there's always moments where we have to revert, where something goes wrong, something doesn't work, something isn't working as it's intended to. We know that these are established, and so it's important to keep these as relevant and intact, and really is coherent between the two as possible. And some other additional things that are important to think about, and kind of next steps and follow-up questions that we've had, as well as a lot of the moving forward information and things that you want to provide as far as funding and geospatial call routing. Both of those are key elements of that, is being able to show that you are meeting this 98% NENA compliance, and you're seeing this match happen between your legacy data and the data that we're referring to now for the geospatial call routing. I know in particular in my experiences, I worked recently with a CAD vendor. We're working with one of our clients to set up and establish quickest route, and working through all of those elements there. Legacy data was a pillar in that. It was super important. So it's something to keep in mind, that it's something we're bringing with us. It's something that we're utilizing as our foundation to build our Next Gen 911 data. And then, as Annie's just pointed out in the chat, it's really important to know, how are you going to establish that? How are you going to get there? So your reporting efforts, your maintenance methods, your workflows, which we'll talk a little bit about later throughout this PowerPoint and this presentation. But how do you guys know? I know for VEP and us here at DATAMARK, what we're utilizing in VEP and what we offer to our clients is looking at the MSAG comparison, being able to build an MSAG off of your road center line. So you've been working really hard on Next Gen 911 information and getting those layers together. How to build off of that if you're starting from square one, how to draw that comparison instead of doing maybe like a stare and compare method. So just making it a little bit easier. But of course, for everyone, it's important to establish these workflows and what you want to see out of legacy data, and how you want to provide that 98% reporting, and how you want to see that reflected. So very important to establish that and understand where to go there. Another important piece with this is knowing your core service provider standards, how this relates to the management of your data set. So of course, the goal here is to have that one synchronized data set that you want, but we're pulling in legacy data that we have. There's vendors and CAD vendors that are implementing their own schemas within their GIS data. So there's a lot of different moving parts here when you're looking to go live and you're looking to have these NENA standards met. So it's important to know those. A good example of that is to know your ESN data and what that's looking like. For street attribution, if you have AV for maybe some of the vendors, when you're looking at CAD, they have AV for avenue, but you have AVE for other standards, and what you have. It's nice to know those differences and to point those out. And so building that into your workflow is really important. If we want to go ahead and jump to the next slide, I'm just
Hang on real quick.
Yeah.
I want you guys to see, my chat finally went through. So for all of our friends here in the webinar, number one, are you at least 98% or above synchronize your MSAG Alley databases with your GIS? And two, how do you know? How do you know? So just take a sec. You can respond in the chat if you want. Hopefully that chat went through to everybody. It says to everyone.
I think I'm seeing it. Yeah.
Okay. Amanda, thank you. Okay.
Yeah, looks like it went through.
Anyone else? Thanks, Jenny.
Good.
In-house driven. Monthly reporting.
Aslan, yep, VEP. So for, after you've done a lot of work, yes, it is a lot of work. So for a lot of you who are just starting your journey, I mean, like I said, we have a lot of folks in the webinar who are in different of G911 journey. If you're exploring ways to understand that, you might have seen in the chat a couple people are talking about VEP. That is DATAMARK's NG911 GIS validation software. So it actually looks holistically at your legacy databases and your GIS data, and we run validations on all of that to make sure that it's meeting those standards. So if that's something that you guys are thinking about, or if you've had conversations within your localities, we would love for you to take a look at that with us and learn how that can be helpful for you. Because like Adam mentioned earlier, a lot of the funding, the grant funding, will rely on you being able to prove that synchronization.
Yeah, it's super important to establish this. Whether it's VEP or I've seen some where people are saying in-house synchronization tools that you've developed. What's important is knowing and establishing that workflow and taking that information as you're developing this and carrying through. Alrighty.
Hey, one more thing. Sorry, Adam.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
I did want to say that in your effort to get your data cleaned up, as far as your MSAG, a lot of times you can work with your provider and they may have stipulations about how many corrections you can make per day. And they may be able to kind of bump that up for you so that you can submit even more corrections. And we highly recommend that you do that if you have a lot to do and to submit. That way you can get as much corrected as possible. Sorry, Adam, go ahead.
Nope, all good. I think I'll probably jump to the next slide where I just want to kind of talk about defining these again, looking at MSAG and ALI and what exactly is this legacy data. I'm just going to take these next two slides to kind of look at that. So taking this from the standpoint of starting from the beginning, basic steps and where this should happen. Of course, there's always a list of things that we can do, but what's the most efficient order of things that we can do them in? Efficiency is going to be a really, really big help here when we have all of these things to do to get ready to prep for next gen 911 and these go lives. So this is just to reference the NENA standard documents of what you should focus on for synchronization. So how exactly do you see these comparisons running? So of course, you're going to want to prepare your data, make sure that that's standardized, make sure that you're having those initial corrections, things that you can do on a mass scale, whether it's mass calculations or going through your MSAGs and filtering those out for you. And then of course, making sure that you get that synchronization going and that you have a workflow and a plan, creating those discrepancy reports to find and then correct those discrepancies. And then of course, there's always this, it feels a lot, at least in my eyes with next gen 911, it very much has this end goal feeling of getting to a certain point. But when you look at it in practice and when you look at things post, go live in this scenario, it doesn't just end. There's constant changes, there's constant maintenance that'll have to happen through both your GIS data set as well as your legacy data. So it's important to keep these updated as you're moving through with your legacy data and ensuring not only you have a workflow and a plan to get to the end there to synchronization, but of course to maintain that synchronization and seeing that percentage. And if you want to go to the next slide, Hilary, I've got a quick little snapshot here of the legacy data management questions. And yeah, So we have our legacy tables here. I've just pulled from what you typically see in our address points and road center lines. This is pulled straight from the NENA data model. We have that linked here in this PowerPoint as well. But you have your community names, your ESNs, all of your legacy data. This is represented in just your address points and your road center lines, just to show them here. But to kind of reference what we're talking about of what you want to see synchronized up with your legacy data in your MSAG and in your alley. So we can go to the next slide as well. And then I have two other final questions on here that I feel like have kind of stood out. So of course, we were talking about the process of what you should evaluate first. You have your GIS data that you've been working on, and you have your MSAG and your alley. So of course, MSAG is going to compare to your road center lines. Alley is going to coincide with those address points. NENA in their documentation recommends ensuring that both are properly standardized and quality controlled before you jump into this process. For me personally, I found in our processes here that you're already really working on your GIS data. Of course, you're pushing for that to hit those geospatial marks. So we always recommend having that get that together so that you, or if you're favoring your legacy data and you know that that's in a good space, maybe you favor that. But find the one that you favor so that you can compare properly to the other one, knowing that you just have the one to knock out. And we'll talk a little bit about how that falls into our process a little bit later with the NG911 data management best practices. And of course, who are the parties that you should communicate with? So this isn't just internal. There's a lot of, like anything with Next Gen 911, a lot of communication that has to happen with other parties. So I've taken this right from our NENA document here of where you'll be able to see what personnel are impacted by this, just this synchronization process itself. You have your governing authority of the 911 data. You have your GIS personnel, your database management systems, postal authorities, local addressing authorities, and of course all your carriers and vendors. So there's all these different parties that you should be talking with, communicating with. A theme that I'd like to push for is kind of like a sub answer to any questions that we get is communication. Communication between all of these different parties is huge because everybody needs to be on the same page to kind of, no pun intended, but it needs to be synced up. Everybody needs to be synchronized here. So to lean into that and utilize all of your different partners. And so no one's reinventing the wheel. Everybody's being able to utilize the same data, utilize the same standards, and rely on each other and knowing what those inputs are. I do see a question that says, is it important to have right and left in your MSAG? Yes. So I know that we have, if we want to go to, it doesn't actually show it, never mind in the snapshot here that I have in this one slide, but yes, those are going to be important to have in your MSAG for your rights and lefts. And if anyone has any additional questions on that, I've been working pretty heavily in the last couple of projects that I've been involved in with looking at MSAG comparisons and things like that. So please feel free to reach out to me if you have any further questions on getting started with your MSAG. Again, to always reference those NENA documents that we have. There's something that I've kind of sort of pinned in my top sort of favorites bar there. Whenever I'm online, it's just I'm referencing them every day. So they're well thought out. They're well put together. So I highly recommend utilizing those as well. And so with that, I'll kind of segue into utilizing your partners, communicating, making sure that you're working on your Next Gen 911 data set for data management. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Hilary.
Hi, everyone. My name's Hilary, and I'm a GIS analyst with DATAMARK. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the common questions that we have that have just been prevalent over the year relating to NG911 GIS data management. I'm a GIS. I'm in the data a lot myself, so I will say that my presentation will be really focused on the data and useful to folks involved with that data management, but also important things for really everyone that's touching this involved to know. So some of the common questions that we've come across are really differentiating between your legacy addressing fields and your NENA addressing fields. So we'll talk a little bit about that. One question that I've seen quite a few times is, you know, what's the deal with all these community fields in the NENA data model, right? We do actually see quite a few. Adam already mentioned one, which is the MSAG community fields. So we'll talk a little bit about why there are different fields and how they're different. We'll talk about kind of where to begin with NG 911 readiness. You know, just to really simply put, the question that we often get is, where do we start with getting into this NENA data model and what are our next steps? So we want to kind of address that. And we did see quite a few questions around, this is kind of going more specific into road centerline data management and how to assign accurate address ranges specifically in that center line. So we will talk about that as well. All right. So I just wanted to start with some examples of how the NENA schema address fields are different. So very often, if you are utilizing what we would call, let's say, legacy GIS data, maybe data that was used for E911 or potentially for another purpose at the county level, we see typically either a complete street name. So if you look at the very top of the screen, in our chart here, we have complete street name. So this is something you might see in a data set that is not NENA compliant yet. And then on the right, we see these street name components parsed out. So one way that the data model for NENA is different is that there are 8 street name parsed fields. And really, some of the questions that we get, I think it depends on where you're at in your journey with NG 911. So this might be new to you. So if you do have questions on the purpose of these fields or how to get started with this, I would say, kind of like Adam mentioned before, to reach out after this webinar. I would say most commonly our questions tend to be around maybe specific edge cases of, okay, I have a good idea of how to do this overall, but I have this really weird road that I'm just not sure, you know, where this specific attribute should go. So this chart is pulled directly out of the CLDXF document, which is one of the NENA standard documents for addressing. And a really good point in here is that some of these do require local knowledge to kind of have a good understanding of where a specific attribute should go. So a good example here is this east-west highway, right? We're throwing in lots of directionals out all at once. Could get a little confusing where these attributes should go. And the reality is that this is nuanced and it could potentially go in multiple places. So if east is truly a pre-directional, and that was the intention when it was addressed, then we would want to parse east into street name pre-directional. But it's also possible that east-west is actually intended to be the full street name. So this is nuanced, and you know, maybe you have an east-west highway, but you also have a northwest highway, and west is the actual street name. So we could see that this scenario playing out differently in different areas. So we have some good examples there on really how that might end up playing out. Another question that we saw pertaining to really the specifics of address formatting in the NENA data model is around the address number field itself. So an important thing to note here is that the address number field in the NENA data model is an integer. So because of that, it can be very important to populate your address number prefix and address number suffix fields, depending on how those addresses are currently formatted, right? So it doesn't mean that you cannot have characters in your address, but we just need to parse those out correctly for the NENA data model. And again, the CLDXF had some really interesting examples, even things that you may not come across, that I've never come across in some data sets. So one example here is you actually get to see how to address leading zeros if you have leading zeros in your addressing in your municipality or in your county. So leading zeros actually do not fit into an integer data type. If you are to try to put a leading zero into the integer data type, it will remove it because that is going to read this as 123 rather than 0, 1, 2, 3. So if our complete address number is 0, 1, 2, 3, we will have the 0 parsed out into the address number prefix, and the 1, 2, 3 will actually be the data value in our address number. Now, once we bring this all together in the data, we can see that the full is 0, 1, 2, 3. And this is what we would want to appear in perhaps a full address field. But when we're talking about the parsed out fields, this is the way that we would like to format that. All right, so another question that I see frequently is what's up with all these community fields in the NENA data model? And it can look like a lot at first, but when we break this down, we kind of start to see how these are different. So I'm going to mention one that's not referenced on this slide. It was referenced by Adam in his presentation on legacy, and that's the MSAG community field. So we want to keep in mind that the MSAG community field is a legacy field, and its intention is to link back to your legacy data, which would be your MSAG in that case. The fields that we're going to be referencing here are specific to the NENA data model, really for our GIS data, and they are not existing to link back to any legacy fields. Some of these are mandatory and some are optional. So for example, incorporated municipality, which we'll discuss, is a mandatory field. Conversely, neighborhood community and things like postal community name, these are optional. So whether a field is optional or mandatory, that's something, if you ever have questions on, you can always refer back to the NENA data model, which will be linked at the end of the slide. And then again, I'll just plug again, reach out to us if you have specific questions here. So I did want to give a quick example on how this might play out to maybe bring some more nuanced understanding to why we have a lot of these different fields. So let's take this example, and hopefully this is visible enough to everyone to see. This is in the CLDXF, and Adam, I don't know if you want to plug the page number like you did before, so people know where to find that. So this chart is also from the same document. And so let's go through, for Hillsborough County here, each attribute and what's being represented. So we have an address point. We can see that this is located in Hillsborough County. And I'm going to start by pointing out our postal community name, which is Tampa. So I'm actually local to this area of Florida. That's why I kind of like this example. If you are not local to Florida, and if you don't know, Tampa is a very large municipality in the state of Florida in Hillsborough County. So if you ever were to visit Tampa, there's a lot of geographic space kind of encompassed here, lots of people. And people kind of throw out, oh, I live in Tampa pretty generally, when in fact they may actually not live specifically in the municipality of Tampa. So the postal community name here is Tampa. Now, really, when we get into the NG 911 kind of geospatial community, we're really going to be more focused on this incorporated municipality, which may or may not have to do with that postal community name. So in this particular case, we have the address point is actually falling into unincorporated territory, which would fall under the jurisdiction of the county. So Tampa has a system that might sound familiar, where the sheriff's department is going to be responding out to these areas of unincorporated. And that's important information to capture that you might not get from this postal community name. So the incorporated municipality really kind of pinpoints, okay, are we in the actual municipality of Tampa, or are we outside of that? If we do have a value of unincorporated, we can further specify using this unincorporated community name what community we're actually talking about. And there are plenty in Tampa of different community names that fall into really unincorporated areas. So in this case, we're in Northdale. And you can even, again, so neighborhood community, this is going to be an optional field, but you can specify really granularly in the NENA data model as far as you want to go, from what municipality you're in, what the name of that community is, whether it's unincorporated or not. We can still specify that really specific detail, and we can even get down to the name of that neighborhood community if we have that information. So really, these fields, they're not meant to tie back to anything in your legacy data. They are meant to be kind of integrated with your geospatial data. And ideally, if you have incorporated municipality boundaries, unincorporated community boundaries, they could also tie into those specifically. So hopefully that example is helpful. All right. And I spoke for quite a bit there. So Annie, Adam, did you have anything to add?
No, we do have a couple questions that came in. Scott's question was about if you have a Tanger Outlet Mall, would Tanger Outlet Mall be the neighborhood and the Nike store inside that complex be the complete landmark? But I do agree with John that I think there's some revisions going on with the landmarks field in the version 2. Yeah. So I don't know if we have any preliminary advice to provide. And then Rebecca asked, what methods are used to outline unincorporated communities? That's been a big one too.
Yep, I would also say I agree with John there. When I think of neighborhood communities specifically, I'm thinking like, and I don't think this exists everywhere, but I do see, at least in the area I'm in, that some neighborhoods do have names that are different from like their city. So yeah. I would be traditional, I guess would be the word, and I would try not to blur those lines. If you have a neighborhood community name, you can throw that data in there. If you don't, I would just omit it. Yeah, as far as the methods to outline unincorporated communities, that's a really interesting question. I think that's something I'd like to kind of get back with the team on. If you're looking to develop those boundaries specifically, I think that's something we'd like to get back to you on, if that's okay.
Yeah, there are a couple thoughts there. I mean, some people are saying postal cities. That's hit or miss for me, just depending on the locality. If you can trust that data, that's great. But I've seen great variation with postal annexation documents. That's a big one. That would be more for, I think, incorporated, but they could de-annex as well. So sometimes that's managed with your assessment data. So there are some different resources out there. Katie says we have post community that's different from municipality. Yes, House of City, Burlington, Texas. Yeah, so sometimes the postal community can be the same as the MSAG community, but that's not always the case. So it really just depends on how that's managed locally. Yeah, you can use census places as well. Yeah, postal stuff changes all the time. All the time. That's exactly right. That's why I don't like to rely on that, because those are more corresponding to carrier routes for mail and not necessarily a geographic boundary. There's a whole world of postal code GIS data management or not information out there.
Yep, and that's that postal community name in the NENA schema is optional because it's not what we're utilizing for call routing for that reason. So if you have that data and you want to put it in there, it's there and you can populate that. But when we're talking about how the call is actually going to be routed, it's going to be based on those other community fields. There is another question here from Elizabeth. This is only for address points, correct? And we don't break our road center lines at subdivisions. So if you were, and Annie, correct me if I'm wrong, if you were going to fully populate that neighborhood community to that granular level, very likely you would be looking at splitting your road center lines. Is that commonly done? Not that I've seen, except in maybe very populated city areas. And I'm thinking, like, I'm just trying to imagine maybe like an area in New York City or something like that, where that could potentially be extremely important, but it depends on your specific area and your situation, whether that's important to you or not. And that neighborhood community is an optional field for that reason. So there's no requirement for you to split at subdivisions, but if you were needing to do that for call routing, then that's an optional approach.
Yeah, if I can help add on to that, I think what a lot of the NENA documentation has been pointing to lately, from at least how I understand it, is that when you are discussing splitting your road center lines or making a change there, making that split, really what you have to look at is your attribution changes that are going to be reflected by that. So anything that's going to be impacted by those attribution changes. So really I would look at it as, how does that impact your data and the attributes that you're tracking within your data that you're able to. So I would use that as a guideline, and then of course always reference, if you're going to, like Hilary said, if you're going to keep it to that detailed level, just to make sure that the data you're pulling from is accurate and updated as much as it can be.
Thanks, Adam. Mm-hmm. All right, I'll go ahead and move on to our next common question for NG 911. And that is really, it's kind of a general question of where to begin when you are wanting to take the next steps with getting into that NG 911 readiness. So what I've put together here is a generalized list of I guess the order of operations with your data of where you might want to start and what you might want to leave until later. So boundaries are very important. We generally like to recommend always have a good understanding of where you're at with your boundaries and looking at the topology and really asking yourself the question, is this going to serve the purpose that I need for call routing? So we want to start by looking at those. Another really great place to start is with your mandatory layers and your mandatory fields. So when we say population of mandatory fields, we're talking about in your address point, so your site structure and your road center lines, populating anything that can be done kind of with a mass calculation. So an example of that would be if you're getting set up with a core service provider, something like your discrepancy agency ID. Now, you can also, if you're just getting started with populating your NENA addressing fields, so those street name fields we discussed, you can, if you have current address data, you can do a process of mass calculating those based on what you already have in your legacy, and then working your way down to that granular level of fixing each individual street and address. So those are two great places to start. Now, we have these two next points here of road centerline topology and road centerline ranges. So the example I always like to give is if you still need to split your road center lines at intersections, for example, you might want to do that first before you start populating your range values in your data, because if you're performing a lot of splits in your line data, as if you are a data manager, you'll know that those attributes will be duplicated. So if you decide to go in and correct a lot of ranges and then go back in after and perform a bunch of splits, you actually will create more work for yourself, because you will have to go back in and rearrange after the fact. So we typically recommend to address road centerline topology, and then go ahead and populate those ranges after the topology is correct. And that should save you a little bit of work there. Once these areas have kind of gotten into a good place, it doesn't mean that you are never going to make a topology change in your center lines again. But once those are in a good spot, getting into some comparisons. So, you know, do my address points match up with my road center lines? Is the range that I assign to this center line capturing all of the address points that should be associated to that center line? So you'll want to come up with a way of kind of validating that and doing some good comparisons, make sure that there's no errors or in the data management, as well as it'll let you know if there's anything funky going on with your addressing practices as well. And then lastly, this kind of ties back into Adam's presentation at the beginning, which is getting into some of that legacy synchronization. So once we kind of have our NG911, our GIS data in a really good spot in terms of the NENA data model, then that's a really good time to start your process into getting to that 98% synchronization. And we have really good suggestions towards the beginning. You know, you can have monthly reporting set up. You can have your legacy data and kind of making sure you're staying up to date on where you're at with that synchronization. And anything to add, Annie, Adam? All right.
No, I think for people who are just starting their NG911 journey, this is really important, kind of purposeful order. You know, your boundary data, your PSAT boundaries are incredibly important. Call routing does not work without them. So you want to make sure you get that stuff squared away first, because as you're going through and cleaning up and aligning everything else, you're going to have to make some decisions about your data along those boundaries, about snapping and so forth. So get those boundaries squared away first, and then kind of work through the rest. And like I said, if you're thinking about a way to validate this data and understand the data quality, you know, VEP is an excellent tool for that.
Thank you. Annie, I know we're coming up on close to the end. Do we want to get into some workflow discussions?
Well, we can keep going. You just go to your next slide. We'll be all right.
Sounds good.
Yeah, this is recorded, so if you guys have to hop right at the hour, I mean, that's totally fine. We'll have the rest of this out there. I don't want to rush through. We're having some really good discussion, like in the chat, and I'm trying to field the Q&A section too. So you guys are doing a good job.
Perfect. We'll keep it going. We did have some really interesting conversations and questions about that actual ranging process that we mentioned. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, you know, how how we've seen folks approach ranging, what your options are, and in a really basic, I would say this is really basic, really kind of minimalist explanation here. You can either choose a theoretical or an actual approach to ranging. So what we have here is just a couple examples of how this might be done. So we have a fictional road here called First Street. And in this case, First Street has these particular address numbers associated to it. Now, I wanted to point out in our examples, bone analysis being drawn in. And just in case you aren't familiar with this, this is simply a relational image. It doesn't represent anything real. So this is not a driveway or anything like that. It's simply an analysis geocoding our address point back to our road center line, letting us know with a quick glance that everything is matching up. So our street names are matching up correctly. And it's also letting us know that this particular address point, 7451, falls within the range assigned to this road center line. So it can be a really nice quick visual check that prevents you from needing to go in and review the attributes for every single address point and every single road center line. So that's what this analysis is showing here. Now, on our left-hand side, we're displaying a theoretical. What that means is we're going to have kind of more of a numeric approach to what addresses are assigned here. So when we say theoretical, we're not going to typically see some exact numbers in our range. We have it in 450. And the important thing with theoretical is just to make sure that these addresses, turn off my camera. I'm going to turn off my camera to make sure that I'm coming in okay. Give me 1 second. There we go. And yeah, thanks for that. Let me know if this is helping or not. All right, so here we have just a theoretical range. This is not the actual address numbers aligned to this road center line. This is simply, in theory, what addresses do we expect to see here? Awesome, glad to hear that that's working. Now, if we were to take an actual approach to ranging, we would simply just be taking that lowest number along this road center line, which is 7433, and the highest number, which is 7451. And that's going to be our starting range, 7433, and our ending range, 7451. One question I've seen is, yes, this can kind of affect if you do perform some kind of geocoding analysis spatially, that line might change depending on whether you're doing theoretical or actual. I personally wouldn't worry about that too much. You know, I think there's a lot of, there's ups and downs to both of these methods. Both of them are valid and are allowed for in NG 911. So it's really a choice of the GIS data manager, whether they want to take an actual or theoretical approach. What I would say is that just the most important thing you want to make sure of is that your addresses are encompassed in that range. So what we don't want is, we don't want an address of maybe 7456 and not falling within this range. So then that address is kind of without and that's what we want to try to avoid with the GIS data management. So that's kind of priority one. You know, when you're looking through your road centerline ranges, we want to make sure all of our address points are encompassed. Let's say you aren't super confident yet in your address data set, and you know, if you were to take an actual approach, you're worried you might be missing some address data. A theoretical approach might be the way to go in that case. But if you are super confident in your address data, actual could be a really good approach as well. Another thing to mention is you can keep in mind your MSAG when you're ranging. So I personally, I don't think they need to, the start and end values need to match up 100%, but it can be good to reference what's in your MSAG when you're kind of looking at your GIS overall. And that'll help you identify issues in both your center lines and your MSAG. So again, we want to make sure that this data is working geospatially, but ranges do also appear in the MSAG. So for that synchronization, you can keep that in mind as well. All right, let's get into some considerations for data management. So very often when we work with NENA data, we know that this data is not just going to be utilized for call routing. And so there's always going to be questions on what do we need to do for our CAD. Sometimes your core service provider might have additional data concerns and requests that may not necessarily be in the data model, but it's a specific requirement for your vendor. So you do want to take note and have those things incorporated into your data management plan. One example of that we come across is if you were to look directly into the NENA data model, there are fields such as one-way and road class, and those are listed as optional in the data model. So if you are going to be compliant with NG 911, those are not required to be populated. However, those may be very critical fields if this data is being used to export to your CAD. So even though it's saying optional in the NENA data model, we would still want to tailor an approach for you specifically and what your goals are and what that data is specifically being used for. And all right. I see a lot of questions popping up. Annie, is there anything that I'm missing here?
No, I think we're doing pretty good. I think we should just keep going because we are right at 3 o'clock. So let's keep going forward. We do have people dropping off, and that's okay. We'll have this recorded.
Love it. So let's talk a little bit about the NENA data model version 2. And one question that we get frequently is, what has changed with this new data model? This was released fairly recently. So the certain types of things that have changed are definitely important to recognize and to incorporate into your data management plan. These include layer names, domains. So there's some differences in the domains recommended by the data model. Field widths have changed. Certain field names have changed, and descriptive names. So this is just some of the items to kind of be aware of that you might not notice right off the bat in reading the new data model. One example of this is discrepancy agency ID, which is a field found in every mandatory layer for NENA. And that width has changed from 75 to 100. So it's just something to note as you are kind of incorporating your plan to upgrade into version 2. These are all things to make sure that you consider when you're making that plan. And I did want to point out, if you were to open up the NENA data model, there is actually a full list. Part of that is pictured here. You can actually see all of the issue revisions and some explanation as to why the change occurred. All of that can be found in the data model. This is a list here of all of the layers, whether they are required, strongly recommended, or recommended. And this is really the version 2. So one thing to kind of really notice here is that these layer names have been updated. So PSAP Polygon, that is the new version 2 name for the PSAP. Fire Polygon, law is now police polygon. So you might notice, oops, looks like I got ahead of myself there. That law has changed from law to police. So if you ever see that change there, just know that that's because we're renaming this in the new data model. All right, so with that, I'm gonna pass it over to Annie to talk a little bit about workflow development.
Awesome. Okay, so, I'm the workflow lady, and that's kind of where I live with all of you. A lot of you have worked with me before on your strategic plans and have me asking you questions. Well, I get a lot of questions too, not just in strategic planning sessions, but also people emailing me, giving me calls. So I want to talk to you about the common questions I've received this year concerning your different workflows. So let's go to the next slide. So concerning addressing, I'm getting a lot of different questions about the addressing authority. So really a lot of it is concerning is the authority, the right authority for my organization or for my agency. And a lot of you have struggles with communication. Maybe your addressing authority is not assigning addresses with public safety best practices in mind. This is a very common thing. Why don't you guys, if you're still with us, why don't you drop in the chat if you're having any issues with your addressing authority, or maybe like what your struggles have been. Just kind of curious to see if there's anyone left in here that's still struggling there. Because really nationwide, there's no standardized way that people are establishing addressing authorities. It could be in your tax assessor's office. Yeah, look, we have 41 addressing authorities, problems all over. So that's very consistent. Yeah, the addressing authority doesn't follow their own standards. Maybe the standards don't exist, or they're written on some old ordinance that's from that's older than me, and it's on papyrus paper and it's falling apart. People don't know what their addressing systems are. All of this stuff is super common. So I'm still getting a ton of questions concerning addressing authorities. Is it the appropriate agency? Yep, Autumn, you're the addressing authority for your town. I know you do a great job over there. Yeah, you have addresses that are out of order, and sometimes people fix them, sometimes they don't. So I'm still getting a ton of that. Municipalities are concerned. Self-addressing municipalities are still a huge concern for a lot of our county clients. And the reason being is because often self-addressing municipalities do not have any type of GIS. They're not managing their data in GIS. They may not be recording those addresses at all, or even reporting them to the county, although the county is expected to dispatch resources and provide support in emergencies within these municipalities. So that's been a huge concern. People have holes in their data. If you guys struggle with missing address points, is that something that's a struggle for you guys? Do you guys feel like you don't have a good picture of all of your addresses, either because of self-addressing municipalities or because perhaps you have some other things that are mismanaged, like sub-addressing? Is that a problem for you guys? Drop that in the chat. So DATAMARK has a service that's called an ACE, which can help you identify missing address points. People have seen tremendous value in this service, getting all of that information filled in. And of course, that's just the start, right? You can get it filled in and get it up to a good baseline, but then you have to establish workflows going forward to make sure that you're receiving that information on a regular basis, and that's being incorporated into your GIS. We've also experienced where we have multiple addressing authorities are trying to manage everything in one data set. That's been a challenge. And then we've had a lot of people reaching out to us concerning addressing education and solutions. So One of the things that we've kind of kicked off this year is our educational program with DATAMARK, and I'm doing some statewide training in different places concerning addresses. So there's like a whole addressing workshop that I do, and I will even ask you guys for local examples of kind of like where you're struggling. And then we kind of go through that in the class, and we start from scratch and figure out what is the best way to address a specific location or site or subdivision, etc. So we have had a lot of questions concerning education and also addressing solutions. How many of you guys are using an addressing solution currently? Are you using like the Esri address management system or like DATAMARK? We have Cloud Assign. Are you guys using that? Do you have any type of CAD vendor solution? Yeah, so we have had a lot of questions this year concerning address management. Sub-addressing is still a huge headache for you guys. And it's determined locally. And it's one of those things where, again, there are no real standards that I've seen implemented that are applied across, multiple agencies or localities. A lot of you are struggling with mixed use buildings. I live in a town our city's almost 300 years old. So we have a lot of buildings downtown that are mixed use. So you have like commercial, as far as, a mixed use would be commercial. You could have retail or restaurant with apartments above. And it's like, well, how do we deal with that? So I'm getting a ton of questions about how do I address anything with a sub-address? What about mobile home parks? How about addressing primary versus using a sub-address? So there's a lot of different things that we're seeing come in for sub-addressing. A lot of you, you guys got to tighten this up for me. A lot of you guys are assigning primaries, but you're letting property owners and developers assign the subs. Please stop doing this. This is stuff that keeps me up at night, okay? Because it's a risk. Your job as an addressing authority is to assign addresses for public safety. You have a duty and an obligation to make sure that your citizens are safe. So one of the ways that you can do that is provide addresses that are logical and consistent for public safety to follow, okay? There is a lot of content on YouTube if you want to learn about addressing. But like I said, I do a whole workshop, and we can really dig into your individual issues, as it were. I've had a lot of questions about mile markers and mileposts. I would really encourage you guys, as you're listening to this webinar today, to start going back to the standards, to the NENA standards, because there are a lot of different gems in there. Like, a lot of people don't realize that in the address data model, you are not actually required to provide a structure number in the address data model. Okay, so a milepost is an alternate way of providing location information to an address, just like lat long, just like additional location information. Look at that data model, okay? Because mile markers, yes, you can maintain a mile markers data set, which is a great reference. But if you have a lot of areas within your community that are better addressed, not with a number, but with an actual like milepost, then you can incorporate your milepost in there. So that's why I included this screenshot. Okay, let's go to the next slide. All right, so I've had a lot of questions concerning road approval, road naming, road management. We talked a lot about ranging and numbering earlier. So as far as the road ranging, your theoretical ranges work great in urban areas where you have a lot of infill addressing and a lot of sub addressing. You want to make sure that you are allowing room for all of that infill, but may not be appropriate for more rural areas. A lot of you have asked me about maintaining driveways in the road centerline layer. There's nothing inherently wrong about doing that, but what I need you to understand is that the road center lines are required for call routing, okay? They have specific requirements. So if you're gonna manage your driveways in there, then you have to make sure that your road center lines, or your driveways, excuse me, are actually meeting the same requirements, okay? So you wanna manage your driveways in there, that's fine, but you gotta make sure that they're meeting the same requirements if you're gonna put them in your road center line network, okay? Just don't think that because it's a driveway, it's not subject to those rules, because it is, okay? So You could manage them in a separate data set. You could also create access points. That's an alternative. We do that for folks too. SOPs for naming roads. Please put those into place. Duplicate road names are a huge problem for a lot of people. I'm actually doing a project right now in a community where we're actually readdressing the community because there are so many duplicate road names. We're readdressing almost the entire community. And you may not think this applies to you, but when you're facing some type of litigation because of, you know, duplicate road names or poor addressing, I mean, this is stuff that we come across quite often. Okay, so please implement SOPs. Standards, ordinances are huge. You guys really need to dust off those ordinances because those are the backbone for your authority. Okay, and that's what you're going to fall back on when people want to disagree with you about a decision. I also need you guys to start looping in. Thanks, Dan. I also need you to start looping in public safety into your approvals. Make sure that your names are not an issue for public safety. You don't want anything that sounds or is spelled phonetically similar to another road name. And again, if you are a VEP user, you do have that Soundex that's available to you that can help you with that. An interesting topic that's come up has been honorary road names. This is something that it's funny because when you look online, there's a lot of information out there about honorary road names. Like a lot of communities have this implemented. And if you don't know what that is, an honorary road name is usually awarded posthumously, but it can be based on an individual or like an event that was a big part of a community. And it's a way to honor that person or that event in that community. Okay, the problem is that it's usually another road sign. Okay, and while it is, the intentions are pure and good, I'm gonna advise that you guys shy away from this. Okay, because if you look at this screenshot that I provided you below the picture, for NG 911, you can only have one primary street name that's being used. Yeah, we have alias tables. Okay, that's fine, but that's not used in the call routing for a civic location. To ensure a civic location is valid, it's using the primary road name. So don't make things difficult for people calling 911, having to figure out, hey, what's the right road name to use? Okay, because those alias tables are not going to be used in that process. Okay, so my recommendation is, and I understand that with honorary names, often it's not resulting in a change to someone's address. If you look at a lot of the local policies, they are very, oh, no addresses are going to be changed, which makes it really appealing, right, for business owners. But at the end of the day, it does cause confusion for public safety. And I do think that you either need to rename the road itself and change everyone's address, or you can put like a little plaque that says the section of this road is dedicated to this person, or is in memory of this person. That's a better way to handle it. And I don't know, is that an issue in your guys' communities? Have you come up against this honorary road name issue? Has it been a problem for your public safety? Okay. I'll just keep going because I know we're over. All right, let's go to the next slide. And another thing that I'm super involved with is developing service boundaries. So your PSAP boundary is for call routing. It's used to make sure that the call gets into the right PSAP the first time. Okay, you can and you should change this boundary as needed. Okay, if it makes sense to. Your PSAP boundary is not the same as a jurisdictional boundary. Okay, yes, I understand the geometry can look the same. Okay, that's fine. You can do a copy paste of your county boundary to your PSAP boundary. Okay, but you shouldn't just do that and then walk away from it. You really need to work with your individual neighbors, your individual counties, and make sure that you're engaging public safety. These are not GIS decisions. You need to make sure you're engaging public safety to get these boundaries developed. Okay, because they are authoritative PSAP decisions. Yes, GIS people, I love a pretty picture. I love congruent lines. Okay, but I also like my data to be accurate when it's used for calling and saving people's lives. Okay, so that's the biggest issue. And the way that you can accomplish that is through communication. We have boundary workshops that we do, so this is something I'm super familiar with. And you do need to figure out how to resolve discrepancies along those boundaries. Okay, if you are acknowledging that there are areas where you have significant transfers, you need to adjust your boundary in those areas. Okay, that's what a PSAP boundary is. Annexations have been a really big deal, I would say, the last year and a half. Because, hang on, guys. Sorry, I've had this persistent cough for like a month now. Annexations are critical for 911. You want to make sure that you are resolving and reflecting all of that information as it comes along. It figures my lungs fail when it's time for me to present. That's great. Okay. A lot of you want although the PSAP and the jurisdictional boundaries are two different boundaries with two different purposes, a lot of you want those to align. My city boundary is my PSAP boundary. You have to make sure that 911 is looped into those annexations. You have to have a workflow in place. I'm seeing a lot of this that's very concerning, where there are annexations that are occurring. They may not be recorded appropriately. Data may or may not be reflected in the official city boundary. Consequently, it's not reflected in the PSAP boundary. Okay. And often it's also not reflected in the emergency service boundaries or the ESNs or the ESEs that you guys are using in your CAD systems. So you're swapping calls back and forth, back and forth. You have to look way upstream at what's going on, because annexations are incredibly important. Are annexations issues in your communities? Is that something you guys are struggling with identifying the appropriate agency, with getting the information, with getting it updated in your GIS and all of the different layers? Is that a problem for you guys? Okay, let's go to the next somewhat. Yeah, it just depends, right? It's not like I'm seeing it every day, but you know, it is a significant issue in a couple communities where I've worked in different states. So we do have resource links. Check out the data stewardship model, or the data stewardship document that just came out this year. It's got a lot of great information in it. The data model, the CLDXF, the synchronization, and the site structure address point placement are very, very helpful. And then I think we had, yes, that's right, Rob. I mean, that's a big problem. Stuff falls through the cracks, and it can be problematic for 911 as well. So let's go to we have a contact slide. We're going to give you guys our email addresses at the very end here. And if you guys have any questions, you can reach out to us. I know we went like super over, and I'm very sorry about that, but I thank you guys for hanging in there. And real quick, I did want to say that I know how hard you guys work, and I know what you do, because I've had a lot of your roles before. And I just want you to know how deeply appreciated and loved you are, not only by us, but within your community. You're doing extremely important work, and we just appreciate you so much. And we're here for you. We don't ever want anybody to feel like they're stuck. You can reach out to us anytime. And I hope that you guys have a very happy holiday season with your friends and loved ones. Merry Christmas, happy holidays. You guys are the star on our tree, okay? You knew we weren't going to get out of a webinar without hearing something weird from me, because this is just what I do. But we appreciate you, and thank you for being a light for us so that we can keep going and doing this good work. Thanks, everybody.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.